everyone. Hi guys. Welcome back to Karen's Vibes. Reading for the mature audience. Welcome back. I hope you all are having an awesome Sunday evening. Whatever it is that you're doing. Alright, so welcome. Remember you can find me on YouTube, and that's Karen Karen Vibes with an exclamation sign on YouTube, and you can always join me and listen to my videos with my different books that I've read so far. Well, I've read one so far, and this is the second book I'm on. I'm so sorry that I haven't been able to come on that regularly as I wanted to, but we're here. I'm here. All right, so let's get into the meat of the matter. So as usual, grab your cup of tea, grab your cool drink, and just let's get into our reading. All right, so here we go. All right, so the name of our book that we're continuing to read is, name of it is Minty Alley, written by C.L.R. James. So just go on to my channel if you're new, and you can just follow where I've been reading. If you've been following me, you would have seen where I left off. And before I go any further, let me say thank you to a few new subscribers that have joined my channel. I want to say thank you for taking the time to subscribe, and thank you to my existing subscribers. I really appreciate it. My goodness, someone, you know, my forehead looks so shiny. Oh my goodness. I always have a problem with my forehead being so shiny. I used to joke when I was growing up. I always joke and say, oh boy, when people say my forehead shine, I say yes, because I have a big forehead, I guess so. I guess that's why it's extra shiny. Laugh out loud. I don't know. I tend to have an oily face. Doesn't matter what I do. Face always seems to be oily. Anyway, guys, let's get into our stories. All right, so we had finished chapter 10. Last time we read chapter 10, and we had finished chapter 10. So we're now at chapter 11. So the name of the book again is Minty Alley, written by C.L.R. James and narrated by me, Karen Ware. All right, so let's get into it. Let's get into the meat of the matter, as my friend would say. All right, chapter 11. Next day, Haynes, dreading being dragged into conversation and discussion by Miss Atwell, kept himself to himself, as the lady would have said. But after tea, Ben came to see him. Ben chewed at his nuts as usual. He couldn't eat while working in the kitchen, up to his arms in flour. So as soon as work was over, he began. He looked tired. His cheeks were drawn and his eyes bloodshot, as on the night after the nurse had left. But he was very cheerful. You have any cigarettes? He asked Haynes. Haynes showed him the box and he lit up. He looked at Haynes' bed covered with books and magazines. I thought you was on a time with the coolie, he said. But I find out I was wrong. But you're a funny fellow. You only reading books the whole day? A young man like you? Man, when I was your age, by the time one was out, another was in. I guess so he's talking about girls having females. This man have no shame. Anyway. A young man like you? Man, when I was your age, by the time one was out, another was in. You have a nice little bachi here, where girls can pass through the back without nobody seeing them. What's wrong? You sick? Haynes said nothing was wrong with him. You don't go after girls. Haynes said nothing Haynes said nothing was wrong with him. You don't go after girls. Of course. Haynes lied bravely. But not very much. These books you always reading. He picked up one and looked at the title. Ha, about science. You read about science? Tell me something. Then you have books about C.L.R. This C.L.R. was an American writer on magic and psychic science, whose books had some vogue in the islands. No, said Haynes. It isn't that sort of science. That book is about birds and animals and electricity and so on. Ben put the book back on the bed. A man with your intelligence. If you read books on science, you would do well. See now, about 2 o'clock, all the spirits of the air passing up and down. And if you know what to do, you can compel them and make them do what you like. Haynes stared at him. Was the man mad? How can you control them, he asked. But Ben, unusually so outspoken, laughed uneasily. Not today. Another time. I hear you was in charge last night, nursing the sick. He chuckled low down in his throat. No, I just went in to see what had happened. Why? She's a stupid woman. She's only making things worse for herself. Let her go on. What will you do? Marry the nurse? Ben laughed. Marry the nurse? Not me. Take it from an experienced man. Never marry a nurse. As soon as a sick man getting better, the first woman he wants to live with is his nurse. She right on the spot, you see, and that one in particular, she'll do anything, man. I living with her, but I know what she is. But this one, I can't understand her. She's so stupid. I am still here helping with the cake. I check in the book. I doing everything as before. All men go out. What she making such a fool of herself for? She's jealous, said Haynes. Student of human nature. She wants you for herself, and you treat her very badly, Ben. If you went down once or twice a week to the nurse, perhaps in the night, but going as you do makes her ashamed, and you neglect her. Neglect her? I don't neglect her, man. Don't think so. I don't neglect any woman belonging to me, man. Don't go so often and so openly, said Haynes. I'm not going to give up the other one. Rose can do what she like. He didn't go that afternoon. At 5 o'clock, he checked the book, but after supper, he was off again. On the Tuesday during lunch, the smothered fires blazed. Mrs. Rose shrieked at him to take the things and leave the damn house and go. Either he was to stay with the nurse altogether or leave off going there. Ben said that she could do what she liked. He was going to do as he pleased. Mrs. Rose seemed to go mad. You leave me. Imagine, you leave me for a decent woman. You leave me. Imagine a decent woman like me for a whore. A woman who used to carry on her whoring in this very house. You dirty dog. Her voice cracked with the strain she had put on it and with passion. Somehow, Miss Atwell, whose affairs had been settled now and was out again, had been drawn or entered of her own accord into the quarrel, under the pretext of pacifying Mrs. Rose. From the hour she came out of her confinement, she took Mrs. Rose's side and fought for her valiantly. "If Jesus came down and asked me, I'm not giving up the nurse," said Ben. Miss Atwell professed great respect for religion and had a wide, if inaccurate, knowledge of biblical story and points. "Mrs. Rose, I have to leave you," she said in a grave importance voice. "I have to leave you. I can't put up with this blasphemous rebel." Maisie's mocking laughter underscored the gibe. "Who asks you to put up with me, you dried up old broomstick? Why don't you shut your mouth? You have a man and weeks past you don't see him. So what have you to quarrel about?" Why Maisie out order, you know, you're talking to Miss Atwell. Maisie laughed again. Miss Atwell's door slammed, but she continued the quarrel from inside her fortress. "Let me keep far from you, man," she said. "God going to strike you down, 'cause you see me as I am here. 'Cause you see me as I am here, you think I am your sex. In my day, you think I would have looked at anything like you? You has no upbringing. I has been brought up, and I have brought Topsy. Good education and religious training in my Sunday school. I know what's what. I know what's respect. If Jesus Christ come down, when God take a turn in your skin, you're going to know something. Dragging the name of the Savior into your dirty goings on. I am a sinner, but I know my place. Go on, Mr. Ben. Go on rejoicing in your evil deeds. Your Calvary is awaiting you," said Miss Atwell, still quarreling within her room. Gradually, the yard grew quiet. The quarrel seemed over. Miss Atwell remained in her room. Haynes came outside to start for the office, but before he left the yard, Maisie called to him. "You see anything strange in the room this morning?" "Anything strange? Like what?" "Whole morning a dried up old broomstick was in the yard, and now I'm looking for it everywhere and I can't find it." Haynes rolled his bicycle away as quickly as he could, but before he reached the street, he could hear Mrs. Rose thumping Maisie and Maisie swearing that she hadn't meant anything. So Maisie come out in the yard and throw a word at Miss Atwell. I call Miss Atwell about she looking for one dried up broomstick. What a facey girl. Alright, so chapter 12. So let's read on. Excuse me. Alright, let's read on. Chapter 12. That outbreak took place on Tuesday morning. Tuesday afternoon and Tuesday night, Ben went away as usual. Wednesday afternoon and again Wednesday night. It was not Haynes' business at all, but he felt irritated with the man. After all, he lived at number 2, and it would cost him nothing to exercise a little restraint. Every time, as soon as he left, the talk broke out in the yard. "But you ever see a thing like this? You ever see a thing like this? The man ain't got no shame. If it was me, I'd have thrown his clothes in the canal." On Thursday morning, he did not turn out to work. At 7 o'clock, he came into Haynes' room, dressed in his new brown suit, and asked Haynes to give him a recommendation. "A recommendation?" said Haynes. "Yes, a recommendation. I am going to look for a job, said Ben. Said Ben. I'm going to look for a job. Sorry, I'm going to look for a job down at the West Indies Trading Company, said Ben. The manager knows the nurse. She attends to his wife and they like her. They make her a nice present. And she asked him about a job for me. Guys, you notice with Ben, he look like him just coming like, as I said, Frightened Friday. Everything he talk about present. Oh, the nurse get this and the nurse get that. So it look like it's the present them holding. Frightened. As Jamaicans would say. Frightened man. Or I'm licky. Anyway, let me read back over here. So I'm going to look for a job down at the West Indies Trading Company, said Haynes. The manager knows the nurse. She attends to his wife and they like her. They make her a nice present and she asked him about a job for me. Haynes said no. The idea of his giving a recommendation was absurd. He was a person of no consequence and could not give any recommendation. But Haynes, man, don't let me down. All you have to do is say that I am your landlord and you know me to be trustworthy. Oh my God, and you know me to be trustworthy and so on. You know how to wield the pen, man. But I have no right. Nonsense, man. Here is a pen. Here is a piece of paper. This is to start writing. This is to certify. Come on, Haynes. It costs you nothing. Oblige a friend. Haynes sat down and wrote. So I just put Haynes under pressure. Haynes sat down and wrote. Read it, he said, giving it to Ben. No need to read it, said Ben, folding the sheet of notepaper and taking up an envelope from the table. Yes, man, I am going down. The nurse told me that a man of my appearance have no right making cakes and get hype now. Right? The nurse told me that a man of my appearance have no right making cake. That's right. Confidence, turn up. She says she will help me to get a good job. Righto, Ains. He left, but he came back quickly. Listen. This is between us, eh? He said, and winked knowingly. As you say, said Haynes. Honor bright, you can depend on me. Ben had not gone 5 minutes when there was a knock at the door. Mrs. Rose thought Haynes, and it was. Come in, madam, he said, and offered her a chair. No, Mr. Haynes, I'm not for long. The difference between her appearance today and before, when she had led Haynes into that very room, made him realize more than imagination could what she had gone through. Then she was a stout housewife, slightly careworn, but cheerful, hopeful of the future if even things were not as bright as she wished. Today she was a defeated woman. In her eyes a haunted look which she no longer took the trouble to disguise, sustained merely by the necessity, to keep the wheels of her business going. And Haynes felt deeply sorry for her, and felt too that by talking and laughing with Ben, he was doing Mrs. Rose a great wrong, and was aware that it was stupid of him to feel that way, but could never entirely rid himself of the feeling whenever he stood face to face with Mrs. Rose. He waited for her to speak. You must excuse me interrupting you, Mr. Haynes, she began, and her voice was thin and quavering. But I hope Mr. Ben has not been worrying you about anything. Oh, no, Mrs. Rose. He hasn't worried me at all. I saw him with an envelope. I hope you didn't endorse any promissory note for him. No, Mrs. Rose, it wasn't that. Never do anything like that for him, Mrs. Haynes. Sorry, never do anything like that for him, Mr. Haynes. He's not a man to trust. She looked searchingly at Haynes. He didn't ask you to lend him money. No, Mrs. Rose, he didn't. He didn't. He didn't really. All right, Mr. Haynes, I believe you. But I wonder what that man is up to now. God have mercy on me. It is nothing important, Mrs. Rose, said Haynes. What was it, Mr. Haynes? I want to know. Tell me, Mr. Haynes. Don't mind any promise you made to him. I am the woman who, with all my troubles, have to bear the burden of this house. All right. He asked me for a recommendation. He said he was going to look for a job. Going to look for a job? Today he going to look for a job? 17 years we have been together. He never went to look for work. And today, she stopped short. There was an awkward pause. She broke it. Thank you for telling me, Mr. Haynes. And Mr. Haynes, since the other day I was to tell you, since you come here to live, there is only noise and quarreling in this place. That woman has broken up my house. I put up with her long enough, and now when I finish with her, the man starts. I hope all this don't disturb you too much. This isn't a house like that, Mr. Haynes. And all the noise I made the other morning, and all the bad words. It's quite all right. It's quite all right, Mrs. Rose. I know how worried you must be. I am sure that everything will turn out well in the end. I heard them saying that you wanted to leave. Not at all, Mrs. Rose. I was quite comfortable here. She looked brighter. We have to trust in God, Mr. Haynes. Yes, Mrs. Rose answered. Yes, Mrs. Rose answered devoutly. That confirmed heretic and hurried off to work. Haynes took his meals in town that day, for Ella was not well and he had told her to stay home. Ella suffered from bronchitis, which was not a thing to play with when the rainy season is on. It was after 10 when Haynes returned, but Maisie was standing by the gate talking to a young man. A rather unusual thing at that hour. Mrs. Rose had generally sent a peremptory message to her long before that. The energetic and hard-worked Phyllis was still moving about in the kitchen. Phyllis hadn't spoken to Haynes since that night, but the warmth of her smile and her greetings were more radiant than ever. She was a simple soul with a golden disposition. Haynes went quickly to his room, locked the door, and getting into bed, blew out the light. He did not feel inclined for any talking, and Phyllis' "Good night, Mr. Haynes," and the way she had come to the kitchen door had indicated clearly that she was willing to sleep with him. He dropped off to sleep. He was deep in his dreams when he was awakened by a loud screaming and yelling. Phyllis' voice and an insistent shouting of, "Mr. Haynes, Mr. Haynes, murder, murder, Mr. Haynes!" And again, "Murder, murder!" He sat up in bed and listened. He distinguished another voice, Ben's, but could not make out what he was saying. The voices were quite near. In the yard, by Mrs. Rose's doorstep, Phyllis had ceased to call, but she still screamed. With Ella's warning in his hand, Haynes unlocked his door and looked out. There was no moon, but the night was bright with starlight, and at the bottom of the doorstep was an arresting group. Mrs. Rose sat on the ground, limp and supported in Phyllis' arms. Maisie stood near, looking rather detached and leaning against the same young man she had been speaking to at the gate. On the bottom step stood Ben, dusting his shoulder with one hand, while in the other he held the long kitchen knife. Haynes first thought that Mrs. Rose had been murdered, and his heart gave a great leap. Oh my God, that's not a laughing matter at all. Shut your damn mouth, said Ben to Phyllis. What the hell you making all that noise for? This is the end of it though, he continued, and stamped into the house. Haynes went out to Phyllis' assistance and found to his relief that Mrs. Rose had only fainted. Phyllis began to explain what had happened, but Haynes cut her short. Come, let us get her in. Mrs. Rose showed no signs of coming to, and Mr. Haynes was a Boy Scout of many badges. Come on, Maisie. And you, sir, please help. Meanwhile, from inside came 2 or 3 resounding cracks as of some heavy article of furniture being smashed to pieces. They lifted Miss Rose in. She may have lost weight during the last few weeks, but was still uncommonly heavy. They got her into the drawing room and placed her on the very sofa on which she had lain the Sunday night. Then Miss Atwell appeared, as timely as if she was a character in a play, for Phyllis could hardly see to do anything, being blinded by the streams of tears which flowed down her face. Come, Miss Atwell, said Haynes. Come quickly. He was frightened, for Mrs. Rose lay stiff and quiet. He recalled horrifying instances of people who had fainted and never recovered. And if anything happened, he was in it to his neck. What's all this? Said Miss Atwell. I went to see Ella. The bedroom door opened. Ben came out with a bundle of clothes on his arms and 2 boxes. He went to the front door, wrenched it open with a powerful jerk, and was gone without a look or word to anybody. Maisie ran to the door and followed him down the steps. What the... began Miss Atwell. Don't mind that, said Haynes anxiously. See about Mrs. Rose. Miss Atwell began to open Mrs. Rose's clothes, and the modest Haynes betook himself to the dining room and stood by the door ready to go for the doctor at the slightest word. Maisie had got rid of her cavalier. Maisie had got rid of her cavalier and came and stood by Haynes. But Haynes was not concerned with Maisie, nor worried that she had been all those hours outside with the young man, a fact which in recent days would have given him some concern. He was thinking of himself. He was thinking of himself in the witness box, explaining how he had held Mrs. Rose's hand, and Miss Atwell had told him to comfort her. But in 5 minutes, Mrs. Rose had come to herself. They lifted her into her bedroom, which was in disorder, the whole front of a big wardrobe being broken into and clothes scattered all over the floor. They put her on the bed, and Haynes went back into his room at once. It was only the next morning he learned how near number 2 had been to a nasty tragedy. Mrs. Rose, goaded to the point of desperation, had made up her mind to kill Ben. She told Maisie and Phyllis that they were not to come into the house until Ben returned. And Maisie had settled herself unconcernedly by the gate, knowing that she could pass the time away if Mrs. Rose never opened till morning. Phyllis, however, was uneasy and fiddled about in the kitchen, oppressed with a vague premonition that Mrs. Rose intended to do something desperate. That her mistress would kill herself was the thought uppermost in her mind. She had wanted to speak to Haynes about it, but the way you passed and locked the door frightened me off. A stab into Haynes' sensitive conscience. Meanwhile, Mrs. Rose dressed herself and sat by the back door with her hat, her little handbag and the kitchen knife on the table near to her, and her prayer book in her hand. As he opened the door, she would stab him and then give herself up at the police station. So Miss Rose sit down there plan all of that now. So that is how the big fight had started. So she would stab him and then give up herself at the police station. The place was almost in darkness, the only light being the light of the chapel in her bedroom, and the small candle by which she was reading. From 8 o'clock she sat waiting, and it was after 12 when Ben came. He did not see Maisie, for she and her young man had wandered down the alley. Faithful Phyllis, worn out by her anxieties and the labors of the day, had fallen asleep in the kitchen, her head on the dresser. When Mrs. Rose heard Ben's footsteps, she rose, gripping the knife. He opened the door and she raised the weapon to stab him to his... Sorry, let's read this again. He opened the door and she raised the weapon to stab to his black heart. But poor distracted woman, she knew little of how to stab anybody. "Take this, McCarthy, Ben," she said. But McCarthy, Ben took nothing. Surprised though he was, he caught her raised arm. They struggled for 2 or 3 seconds, and then both pitched down the steps. How no bones were broken was a mystery. Mrs. Rose remembered nothing else until she came to herself on her sofa. My goodness, you see how sometimes people can be driven to desperation. Jealousy, anger will make people do things. So Miss Rose knows she can't take Ben's infidelity and his cheating ways and stuff, so she just planned now to just stab him and go hand up herself to the police station. But poor she don't know if to stab. And him end up taking the knife out her hand. And then she fainted and what have you, as we've read. Boy, what a story. What a story. And as much as all this is a story, guys, these things happen in real life with couples. And it is so unfortunate. You know, jealousy will make you do things. Anger. Anyway, we're going to stop there. So we finished reading chapter 11 and chapter 12. When we come back on, we will pick up back at chapter 13. Alright, so folks, we'll leave it there for tonight. Thank you so much for taking the time to have listened to my story. You know, really appreciate you. I want you guys to have a wonderful week ahead. And I hope all your plans and your dreams come true. Alright, so you all have a wonderful evening. Please remember to like. Please remember to listen. Like. Subscribe. And share. Alright, folks. So thank you again. Have an awesome week. Awesome week. Take care of yourself. Take care of each other. Love each other. Be good. Bye.